My name was Julia, and if you are listening to my story today, I am probably gone. But I want the world to know what happened behind closed doors. I was a simple girl. I believed in love. I believed in marriage. I believed that one day I would have a home filled with laughter, not screams. When I met Michael, he was charming. Kind words, soft eyes, promises. Oh, he made so many promises. I was young. I believed every word. We got married in a small church. Everyone said I was the luckiest girl in the world. They didn't know that sometimes the prettiest smiles hide the darkest secrets. The first few months were beautiful. He held my hand. He wrote me little notes. He told me I was his everything. But slowly things changed. At first, the changes were small. Michael would get angry sometimes, maybe for no reason at all. I thought marriage was like that. Ups and downs, fights and makeups. But slowly his anger became storms. One evening, I cooked his favorite meal. I waited for him with a smile. When he came home, I saw something in his eyes. Something cold. Something cruel. "Why is the house so dirty?" he shouted. I looked around. The house was clean. It was shining. But he saw only what his anger wanted to see. That night, he threw the plate against the wall. I stood there shaking. He looked at me like I was a stranger. The man I loved was gone. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. He started controlling everything. Who I talked to, where I went, even what I wore. He said it was love. But love doesn't feel like a cage. Love doesn't break you slowly. I stopped laughing. I stopped dreaming. I was breathing, but I was not alive. One night, I heard him talking on the phone. He didn't know I was listening. His voice was cold, full of anger. "She doesn't listen. She doesn't learn," he said. My heart froze. Was he talking about me? I couldn't sleep that night. The walls felt like they were closing in. I wanted to run, but where could I go? This was my home, wasn't it? Next day, he brought flowers. He smiled like nothing happened. He kissed my forehead. I wanted to believe that my Michael was back. But deep inside, I knew storms don't disappear that easily. I don't know when love turned into fear. When did his eyes stop looking at me with warmth and start burning holes through my soul? I remember one evening. I was sitting by the window. The sky was heavy with clouds, and the rain tapped on the glass softly, like it was trying to warn me. Michael came home late. His shoes were muddy. His shirt smelled of alcohol. I smiled weakly. I didn't want to make him angry, but he threw his keys on the table so hard. I jumped in my seat. "Why are you sitting there like a ghost?" he said. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out, because by now I had learned anything I said could turn into a reason for him to shout. Days passed. I stopped talking much. I started moving like a shadow in my own house. One night, I made a mistake. I told him, "I feel scared sometimes, Michael." I just wanted him to hold me, to say I was safe. But instead, he laughed. A cold, empty laugh. "Scared? You should be," he whispered. That night, I cried silently into my pillow because I realized the man I married wasn't my home anymore. He was the storm destroying it. Then came the night I will never forget. The night when everything ended. The rain was falling hard. Thunder rolled across the sky. Michael was pacing in the living room. His eyes, they looked wild. There was anger, but something else too. Something darker. I begged him, "Let's talk tomorrow. Please, let's just rest." But he shook his head. "No more talking," he said. His voice was ice. "I don't want to tell you every detail because it still hurts. But that night, the man who once promised to love me forever took everything from me, my breath, my dreams, my life. And as everything faded, I remember thinking, maybe the rain will wash away my pain." When I opened my eyes, I was lying on the cold floor. My hands were trembling. The room was silent, too silent. The only sound was the storm outside, and my own heart beating slowly like it was tired of living. I tried to speak, but my voice was weak. I wanted to call for help, but there was no one. Michael stood there, his face pale, his hand shaking. For a moment, I thought maybe he realized what he had done. Maybe he would come close, hold me, call someone. But he didn't move. He just stared, like a stranger looking at a broken thing. My thoughts began to drift. Memories came rushing back. The first time he smiled at me in college. The way he held my hand on our wedding day. The way I once believed he was my safe place. How foolish I was, because love, real love, should never make you feel this small, this unwanted, this empty. The rain outside grew louder. It felt like the sky was crying for me. I wanted to live. I wanted to see another sunrise. I wanted to tell my mother I loved her one last time. I wanted to laugh with my friends again. But life doesn't wait. Death doesn't knock. It just comes and takes. My breath grew weaker. My eyes grew heavy. Michael finally moved closer, but not to help me. He picked up his coat, looked at me one last time, and walked out into the storm, leaving me there, alone. As the darkness closed in, I felt warmth on my cheek. Not his touch, not love, just my own tears. And in those final moments, I forgave him. Not because he deserved it, but because I didn't want to carry hate into the next life. This was Julia's last night, but her story doesn't end here, because every life taken too soon leaves behind echoes, whispers of pain, cries for justice, and somewhere someone will hear them. Someday someone will remember her name. I don't know if you can hear me, But I'm still here. Not in the way I used to be, not in this world, but in the voices that cry for me, in the memories of those who loved me. When the police found my body, the rain had stopped. The house was silent, cold, like the walls themselves had seen too much pain. They covered me with a white sheet, as if my whole life, my dreams, my laughter, could be hidden so easily under a piece of cloth. My mother came running when she heard the news. She screamed my name over and over. Julia, Julia. Her voice broke into pieces like glass shattering on the floor. She held my cold hands, and I could feel her heart bleeding. Not literally, but in the way only a mother can break. She had lost her only daughter. Michael was gone. The man I loved, the man I married. He disappeared into the night like a coward. The police searched everywhere. Days passed. Weeks passed. And then they found him. Not because he confessed. Not because he felt guilty. But because someone saw him in a small town, hiding, living as if nothing happened. The trial was long. People came. They listened. They whispered about me, about him, about love turned into hate. Michael sat there cold, empty, never looking at my family, never saying sorry. The judge spoke for a long time, but all I wanted to hear was one word: justice. When the sentence came, life imprisonment, my mother cried again. But this time it was different. It wasn't the cry of losing me. It was the cry of knowing that at least the world saw his crime.
But what about me?
My dreams, my life that could have been, they buried me on a quiet hill with white flowers and a stone with my name. Julia Carter, beloved daughter, taken too soon. People came for weeks. They left flowers. They whispered prayers. Some cried. Some just stood there, silent. And slowly the world moved on, because the world always moves on. But my story
Stayed with them.
If you're listening to me now, promise me something. Promise me you'll never ignore the signs. The anger, the control, the way love can slowly turn into pain. Because no one deserves to end like me. No one deserves to have their story cut short by the person they trusted the most. I am Julia, and this was my last story. But maybe, if you remember me, if you share this, then a part of me still lives, somewhere in your heart. They say time heals, but time is a strange thing. It doesn't heal. It just teaches you how to hide your pain better. My mother, she changed after me. She would sit by my grave every evening, sometimes talking to me, sometimes just staring at the flowers. Her friends tried to tell her to move on. But how can a mother move on when her daughter's laughter was silenced forever? My best friend, Lily, she stopped wearing bright colors after I was gone. She used to love yellow, but after me, she only wore black. She said the world had lost its colors the day I left. And Michael, he sat in a cell, far away from the life he destroyed. I heard later that he never spoke to anyone, never smiled, never even looked out the window. Some said it was guilt. Some said it was madness. But me, I think it was emptiness, the kind that eats you alive slowly. One night, months after my death, my mother had a dream. She said she saw me standing in a white dress, smiling, telling her I was okay. She woke up crying, not because she was sad, but because she felt for the first time that maybe I was finally at peace. But I wanted her to know I was more than a story, more than a girl who died at the hands of someone she loved. I was a dreamer. I was a daughter. I was someone who wanted to live. And so, when people talk about me now, they don't just talk about my death. They talk about my kindness, my smile, the way I helped others. Because even though my story ended, my life, my love, still echoes in the hearts I touched. If you are listening to me now, promise me something else. Promise me you'll tell someone if you feel unsafe. Promise me you'll walk away before it's too late. Because love should never hurt, and trust should never kill. I am Julia. This was my voice, my pain, my warning, and my goodbye. But maybe, just maybe, if you carry my story with you, I will never truly be gone. After my death, life around me didn't stop. The sun still rose every morning. The birds still sang outside my window. But for the people who loved me, it felt like the world had ended. My mother stopped cooking. The smell of food reminded her of me. She said every dish carried a memory. Julia laughing at the dinner table, Julia tasting the soup and saying, "Needs more salt, Mom." Now there was no Julia to taste it. Lily, my best friend, she began visiting my mother often. At first, she didn't know what to say. They would sit in silence, staring at my pictures on the wall. One day, she broke down and said, "Julia saved everyone, but no one could save her." Those words stayed with my mother forever. The trial began. Michael sat there, his face pale, his eyes hollow. The world saw a monster, but I remembered the boy who once held my hand under the stars. I remembered the man who promised to protect me, and then became the reason my heart stopped beating. People filled the courtroom. Some cried for me. Some whispered about him. The newspapers called me the girl with the gentle smile. But I was more than a headline. I was someone who loved deeply and paid the price for it. Michael never spoke during the trial. Not once. Not when they read the charges. Not when they showed my pictures. Not even when my mother cried in front of the judge. He just sat there, silent, like a man whose soul had already died. When the verdict came, life imprisonment without parole, the crowd gasped. Some said justice was served. Some said it was too late. But my mother, she just held my picture close and whispered, "Nothing will bring her back." Life moved on, but for those who loved me, time froze on the night I left this world. Every birthday, every holiday, they left a chair empty at the table.
For me.
People say grief gets smaller, but the truth is,
Grief stays the same.
it's life that grows around it. My mother learned to smile again. Lily started wearing yellow again, but inside, a part of them was forever broken.
And me?
Some nights, I whisper to them in their dreams. I tell them I'm okay. I tell them to live, to love again, to laugh again. Because if my story ends in silence, then what was all this pain for? After Michael's sentence, life slowly changed its colors. Outside my mother's house, people would come, leave flowers, light candles, stand in front of my pictures, and silently whisper prayers. My story was no longer just a tragedy. It had become a voice, a scream echoing through every heart, a lesson for those who chose to stay silent in pain. Lily often said, Julia kept giving her love, her kindness, but the world never gave her enough to save her. My memories stayed alive in people's hearts. Little children who once knew me as the smiling nurse would ask their mothers, "The nurse lady who gave us candy, where is she now?" And their mothers would hide their tears, unable to answer. Michael's prison life began, but even behind those walls, he wasn't truly free. The moment he broke my heart, the moment he took my life, it kept replaying in his mind every single night. He would wake up screaming, "Julia, why did I do this?" But no answer ever came. The other prisoners whispered, "That's the man who killed his wife." And then they would fall silent. My mother started a foundation, Julia's Light. It was built to help women speak out, to tell them, silence can kill. Don't keep it inside. On the first wall of that foundation hung my smiling picture. Beneath it were the words, "She cared for everyone, but no one cared enough to save her." Years passed, but the pain of my story never faded. Books were written about it, documentaries were made, and in schools, teachers told my story as a lesson for every young girl that love can be blind and silence can cost a life. For Michael, prison was worse than death, because he lived each day, but without peace, without love, and most of all, without me. Lily often came near the prison, but she never met him. She would say, "He needs to know we never forgave him." But hatred destroys us too. Michael never asked for forgiveness. Maybe he didn't have the words anymore. Or maybe he knew some wounds can never be healed. For my mother, life became an endless night. She saw the sun rise, but her world never lit up again. She would whisper, "Julia's laughter was my sunshine, and it has set forever." Even years later, whenever it rained, my mother would stand by the window and say, "Julia loved the rain. Maybe she's somewhere close," reminding us she never left. Time moved forward, but for the people who loved me, life never truly returned to normal. Lily often visited my mother. She would sit silently on the old wooden chair in the corner of our living room, the same chair where I once sat with a warm cup of tea, talking about my dreams, dreams that never came true. One evening, Lily opened a diary she found among my things. It was my handwriting, pages filled with emotions I never spoke aloud. In one entry, I had written, "Maybe one day Michael will see me, not as a wife he owns, but as a soul who just wants love." Lily read those words and broke down crying. She realized how lonely I must have been, even while living with the man I thought was my whole world. The foundation, Julia's Light, began helping women secretly. There were letters, phone calls, messages from women who whispered. Julia's story gave me the courage to leave before it was too late. My mother would hold those letters close to her chest and say softly, "Julia, even in death, you are saving lives." Michael's punishment was heavy, not just the prison walls, but the endless voices in his head. He refused visitors. He refused interviews. Some said he stopped eating properly. The guilt grew inside him like fire, burning, burning, burning every moment. One day, a prison chaplain visited him and asked, "Do you regret what you did?" Michael's face was pale. His voice cracked as he whispered, "Every breath I take reminds me of her eyes the moment I—" He couldn't finish the sentence. The chaplain said nothing more. Some sins don't need sermons. Their weight speaks louder than words. Years later, a journalist wrote about my story.
She interviewed people from my past.
My school friends, my teachers, my patients. One elderly patient said, "Julia once held my hand when I was afraid of surgery. She told me I would be fine, and I was. But no one was there to hold her hand when she needed it the most." Those words went viral. People everywhere cried reading them. My picture became a symbol. Smiling face, gentle eyes. A reminder that even the kindest hearts can break. Schools, hospitals, and even small villages hung my photo on walls, with a single line underneath. In her memory, let kindness be louder than cruelty. Michael lived on, but every birthday of mine that passed, he scratched a mark on his cell wall. Silent, lonely marks counting years. He would never get back. Some said he cried at night, whispering my name into the dark. But I was gone. I never heard him again. The story wasn't just about a husband and wife anymore. It became a voice for countless women, a movement that spread through cities and towns, reminding everyone, love should never hurt. Silence should never kill.
Seasons changed.
Winter snow covered the streets where I once walked, holding coffee in my frozen hands, dreaming about simple joys. A family dinner, a warm hug, a life without fear. But life had other plans. The world moved on. Yet for the people who loved me, time still stood frozen on the night I left. My mother grew quieter as the years passed. She kept my room exactly the same, the books on the shelf, the scarf on my chair, even the perfume bottle half full on the dresser. Sometimes at night, she would talk to me as if I was there. "Julia, are you happy wherever you are? Did you find the peace this world couldn't give you?" No one answered. Only silence filled the room, the kind of silence that screams inside a mother's heart. Meanwhile, the foundation in my name kept growing. Volunteers wrote letters to women trapped in violent homes. They visited hospitals, spoke in schools, handed out little cards that said, "You are not alone. There is help. There is hope." Many women escaped because of those letters. Some sent photos of themselves smiling with their children, safe at last. Every time my mother saw those pictures, she whispered, "Julia, you didn't die for nothing." And Michael, years in prison changed him. His hair turned gray. The anger that once made him powerful now made him empty. He stopped talking to other inmates. He stopped fighting. He stopped laughing. One day he asked the prison warden for paper and a pen. He wrote letters, pages filled with regret, with words like "forgive me," with memories of our first dance, our first trip to the mountains, the way I used to smile even when life was hard. But the letters were never sent. He kept them hidden under his pillow, like a man keeping his guilt close to his chest, so no one else could see it bleed. On the 10th anniversary of my death, people from across the country gathered in my town. Candles lit the streets. They stood outside the hospital where I worked, singing songs about hope, about courage, about women who deserved better. A little girl stepped forward holding a candle. She said softly, "My mother left my father because of Julia's story. If not for her, I might not be alive today." The crowd cried. Even the sky seemed to cry. Soft rain fell like heaven itself was mourning. The journalist who once wrote my story published a book. It was called Julia's Light, the woman who spoke without words. It became a bestseller. People read it on buses, in cafes, in quiet corners of their homes, and many of them wept. Some said the book changed their lives. Some left abusive relationships. Some started organizations to help others. Some simply hugged their loved ones tighter, realizing how fragile life could be. But the one person who never read it was Michael. He refused when the prison librarian offered him a copy. Perhaps he was afraid. Perhaps he didn't want to see himself through my eyes. Perhaps he knew the world had judged him already, and he couldn't bear to face that truth again. As years went on, people began to call me the voice of the voiceless. My story traveled to countries I had never seen, translated into languages I never spoke. But pain needs no translation. Every woman who read it understood. Every man who regretted his mistakes understood. Michael grew older. One night, the prison doctor found him holding one of my old photographs, the only one he had left. He looked at it for hours, as if trying to memorize every detail of my face, before closing his eyes forever. This part shows how the world keeps my memory alive, how Michael slowly fades under the weight of his choices, and how my story becomes bigger than my life itself. The prison walls grew colder as years passed. Michael's health began to fail. His hair was now completely white, his hands shaking whenever he tried to write. But he never asked for forgiveness. Not from my family, not from the world, not even from himself. They said he kept talking to my photograph at night. Guards often heard him whisper, "Julia, I see you in my dreams. You never speak. You just look at me, and that silence hurts more than anything." Meanwhile, my mother visited my grave every Sunday. She always brought white lilies, because I once told her they looked like peace itself. She would sit there for hours, telling me about the neighbors, about the seasons, about how the foundation was helping so many lives. One day she said softly, "Julia, people think you are gone, but I feel you everywhere. In the wind, in the rain, in the way strangers help each other now. Maybe that's what life really means, to leave pieces of kindness behind, so the world becomes softer after you." 10 years after my death, the law changed in our country. They called it the Julia Act. It gave stronger protection to women facing domestic violence. It built shelters, trained police officers, and gave women emergency numbers to call. Some said it was too late for me, but my mother said, "No, that's not too late. If even one life is saved, my daughter's death was not in vain." The journalist who wrote my book came to see my mother. He said, "We are making a movie about Julia's life. The world needs to see this story, not just read it." At first, my mother hesitated. She didn't want actors pretending to be me, to turn my pain into entertainment. But then she saw the script. It wasn't about my death. It was about my courage, about my smile in the hospital, about the way I treated patients with kindness, even when my own heart was breaking at home. She said yes. When the movie came out, people cried in theaters across the world. Some walked out silently, thinking about the women in their own lives, who might be suffering in silence. Some went home and apologized to their wives, their daughters, their sisters. One critic wrote, "This is not just a film. This is a mirror for society. And in that mirror, we see our failure to protect Julia." As for Michael, he never saw the movie. He was too weak,
too haunted by the past.
but a priest visited him in prison and told him about it. They said Michael just closed his eyes, and for the first time in years,
he cried.
The night before his death, he wrote one last letter. The guards found it beside his bed.
It said,
"To Julia's mother, I took your daughter's life, but her love, her kindness, her memory, it took mine long before this prison ever did. I am sorry. I hope the world treats its daughters better than I treated mine." The story of Julia kept spreading to villages, to cities, to places where women had no voice. People began to call her the light that never died. And maybe that's what I became, not just a victim, but a reminder that love without respect is not love, that silence in pain can be deadly, that no one deserves to be broken in the name of marriage. Years had passed since the world first heard my name. Children who were not even born when I died now read about me in their school books. Teachers told them, Julia was a nurse. She healed people. She loved deeply. And she suffered silently until the day her story changed the law. Some of those children grew up to become doctors, lawyers, teachers, but many became activists, fighting for women who had no one else to fight for them. One girl wrote in her diary, "When I grow up, I want to be brave like Julia." My mother grew older too. Her hair turned silver, her hands weaker, but she never stopped visiting my grave. She always spoke to me as if I was sitting right there, listening like I used to when I was little. One day she whispered, "Julia, I saw a young nurse today in the hospital. She had the same smile as you. And for a moment, I felt like I was looking at my daughter again." She paused. The wind blew softly through the trees. "Maybe you send me these signs so I don't feel so alone." The foundation in my name had grown larger. It now had hospitals, helplines, even safe houses for women escaping violence. Every building carried my picture in the hallway. Me, wearing my nurse uniform, smiling the way I always did when I helped a patient. People would stop and stare at that picture. Some would cry. Some would smile. But everyone walked away changed. Because that smile was not just mine anymore. It belonged to every woman who ever deserved safety. Every girl who ever dreamed of love without fear. Then came the day the priest visited Michael's grave. Yes, even he was buried in the same town, though far away from me. The priest placed a small wooden cross there. He said softly, "God forgives all who repent. But Julia, only she can tell you if she forgives you." And the wind blew again, as if carrying my silence across the cemetery. The journalist who once wrote my story became a famous author. He said every award he ever received felt empty, because he would have traded it all, just to bring me back for one more day. In an interview, he said, "I remember the first time I read about Julia. A nurse, a wife, a woman who never stopped believing in kindness. even when the man she loved broke her completely. I wrote her story, hoping the world would change, and maybe it did a little. But the truth? I still dream about the day she died. And I wake up wishing history had another ending. On the 10th anniversary of my death, the city built a statue in front of the biggest hospital. It showed me holding a child in my arms, smiling the way I did with my patients. At the base, they wrote, "Julia, she healed bodies. She healed hearts. And through her story, she healed the world." People came from everywhere to see it. Some brought flowers. Some brought their children to tell them my story. One woman knelt and said, "Because of you, I left my abusive husband. Because of you, my daughter has a mother who is alive today." And maybe, just maybe, that's all I ever wanted, to keep someone else alive. Even if I couldn't save myself. The seasons kept changing. Spring brought flowers to my grave. Summer brought children who laughed and played near the statue. Autumn covered everything in golden leaves. And winter wrapped the world in silence again. But one thing never changed. The way people spoke my name. Sometimes in whispers. Sometimes in tears. Sometimes in anger at the world that failed me. But always with love. One evening, my mother met a young nurse outside the hospital. The girl said softly, "Mrs. Collins, I work here because of Julia. I read about her when I was 13. I told myself one day I will be like her." My mother's eyes filled with tears. "You already are," she said, and hugged the girl like she was hugging me. The priest, too, never stopped talking about me in his sermons. He would stand before the church and say, "Forgiveness is divine, but justice is human." Julia's story reminds us that when we stay silent about cruelty, we are part of the crime. People listened. Some left the church with their heads bowed, thinking about the secrets they kept in their homes, the screams they ignored behind closed doors. The journalist released another book. This one was called "The Girl Who Smiled Through Pain." It was my story, but it also carried the stories of hundreds of women who wrote letters to him saying, "I was Julia once. I survived." The book became a movement. People held rallies holding candles, marching through streets with banners that said, "For Julia, for all of us." And then one day, a letter arrived for my mother. No name, no return address, just one sentence. "I was Michael's cellmate before he died, and I need to tell you something." Her hands trembled as she read on. The man wrote, "Michael cried every night. He kept saying Julia's name in his sleep. He said he saw her in his dreams, and she never spoke to him. She just looked at him with eyes full of pain. He begged for her forgiveness until the day he died." My mother folded the letter slowly. She stared out the window for a long time. Then she whispered, "Even in death, you gave him more mercy than he ever gave you." The foundation built a women's shelter that year. They called it Julia's home. It had bright walls, warm beds, and doors that locked to keep danger out. On opening day, a little girl ran inside, holding her mother's hand. She saw my picture on the wall and asked, "Who is she?" Her mother knelt and said, "She is the reason we are safe tonight." The world kept changing. Laws became stricter. Police took domestic violence seriously. Judges handed down sentences that once would have been ignored. But my story still lived in every headline, every speech, every heart that refused to let me be forgotten. Years passed, but pain has a way of lingering like a shadow. My mother visited Julia's home every month. She brought cookies, blankets, little toys for the children. But mostly she brought hope. She would sit in the common room, surrounded by women whose eyes carried the same sadness mine once did. Some had broken arms, some had broken hearts, and some both. She would hold their hands and whisper, "You are not alone. My daughter's story built these walls for you." One evening, a woman at the shelter asked my mother, "Do you hate him? The man who took her life?" My mother looked at the floor for a long time. Then she said softly, "I did. I hated him so much that I couldn't breathe. But hatred is heavy. It was crushing me, not him. So one day, I left it here in this shelter. I replaced it with something lighter, the will to fight for women like you." The woman cried into my mother's arms that night. For the first time in years, she felt safe enough to cry. The priest arranged a memorial service on what would have been my 30th birthday. The church filled with candles, their flames dancing like little souls in the dark. My childhood pictures hung on the walls, me holding a puppy, me blowing birthday candles, me wearing my nurse uniform for the first time. People spoke about me as though I had never left. Nurses, teachers, children, journalists, they all stood up one by one, telling stories of kindness, of laughter, of the way my smile used to make the hospital feel less like a place of sickness and more like a place of hope. Then came a man no one expected. He was tall, gray-haired, his shoulders slumped like someone carrying too many regrets. "I'm Michael's brother," he said slowly. Gasps filled the room. He cleared his throat. "I came to say,
I'm sorry.
my brother destroyed everything he touched. We share the same blood, but not the same heart. I want to help rebuild what he broke." Some people turned away. Some stared in disbelief. But my mother, she walked to him and said, "If you want to honor Julia, then help someone who still has a chance to live." He nodded, and he did. He became one of the biggest donors for Julia's home. Years rolled on like pages in a long, sad book. Children who once lived in the shelter grew up, went to college, became teachers, doctors, even police officers. They told people, "I had no home until Julia gave me one." But the world also has a strange memory. It forgets fast. One generation grows angry, the next grows busy. Stories fade unless someone keeps telling them. The journalist knew this. So he started a campaign called Say Her Name. Every year on the day I died, people gathered in cities across the country, holding candles, reading my story out loud, so no one could ever pretend it didn't happen. And in the quiet of the night, when the candles went out, when people went home, my name stayed behind, written in the air, in the laws, in the lives I had unknowingly saved. Time is strange. It doesn't heal everything. It just teaches you how to carry the pain without falling every step you take. My mother grew older. Her hair turned silver, but her eyes never lost that tired glow, the glow of someone who had cried so much that the tears ran out years ago. Still, she kept Julia's home alive. She painted the walls bright yellow every spring because she believed sunshine colors could chase away winter memories. One day, a little girl named Lily came to the shelter. She was 7. Her father had hurt her mother badly. They ran away in the middle of the night with nothing but a small backpack and fear clinging to their clothes. Lily didn't speak for weeks. She sat on the windowsill, staring at the road like someone waiting for a miracle that never came. My mother brought her crayons, a doll with messy hair, and chocolate bars wrapped in gold foil. Nothing worked until one evening my mother whispered, "Do you want to hear about a nurse named Julia?" Lily turned her head. My mother began telling my story, how I smiled at everyone, how I believed every life was worth saving, how I wanted the world to be softer, kinder. For the first time, Lily smiled, a tiny, broken smile, but real. Weeks later, Lily left the shelter with her mother to start a new life. Before leaving, she hugged my mother tightly and said, "When I grow up, I want to be like Julia." And just like that, my story became a seed in someone else's heart. But not everyone could escape the darkness. Some women returned to their abusers because the world outside the shelter was colder than the fists inside their homes. My mother cried for them. She prayed for them. But she knew you can't force someone to leave a nightmare if the dream of love still blinds them. She often stood by the window at night, watching cars pass on the highway, wondering how many carried women who wanted to run, but didn't. One winter evening, the journalist came back. He had grown older too. Wrinkles carved his face like lines on an old map. He said, "I want to write a book about her, about Julia." My mother nodded slowly, but she warned him, "Write the truth. Write it raw. Don't make her a saint. Make her human, so people know she was real." The book came out a year later. Julia, the girl who tried to save everyone. It was not a bestseller. It didn't win awards. But in small towns, in quiet schools, in forgotten shelters, women read it and whispered, "This is my story too." Laws began to change. Slowly. Too slowly, but they did. Police were trained differently. Hospitals created safe rooms for abuse victims. Judges handed longer sentences to men who raised fists against the women who once held their children. It wasn't enough, but it was something. And somewhere in all of this, the man who killed me grew older in his prison cell. No one visited him. No one wrote letters. His name disappeared from newspapers. Some said he found God.
Some said he went mad.
I didn't care. The world forgot him. And maybe that was the real punishment. Years passed. The world moved forward like it always does. But grief has its own clock. It doesn't follow calendars. It doesn't care about birthdays or holidays. For my mother, every time someone knocked on the shelter's door, she remembered the night the police knocked on hers. One spring morning, a woman came running to the shelter with a baby in her arms. Her face was bruised, her hands shaking like dry leaves in the wind. My mother took her in, gave her warm tea, and let her rest. The woman whispered, "He said he'll find me. He said he'll kill me." My mother held her hand and said, "You're safe here. No one will hurt you again." She always said those words, even though she knew sometimes the world couldn't keep promises. That night, the woman couldn't sleep. She walked through the shelter's hallway, staring at the pictures on the wall. One picture was mine, Julia's smiling face, standing in front of the hospital where I used to work, my hair tied back, my white uniform shining in the sun. The woman stopped. "Who's this?" she asked softly. My mother said she was someone who believed love should never hurt. The woman nodded slowly, as if she understood something she couldn't put into words. The baby grew up in the shelter for a while. He learned to walk in its hallways, to laugh in rooms that had once heard nothing but sobbing. Sometimes, when he fell asleep, my mother would whisper, "You will never remember her, but she saved you too." Meanwhile, the journalist's book about me started reaching universities, law schools, nursing colleges. Students debated it. Professors assigned it. Some called it a warning. Others called it a lesson in love gone wrong. But a few
called it a prayer for change.
One day, a group of young nurses visited the shelter. They brought flowers and said, "We became nurses because of her." They meant me, Julia. My mother's eyes filled with tears she thought had long dried up. But not all stories ended in hope. Some women from the shelter went back to their abusers. Some never returned at all. Some names were later found in small newspaper articles, the kind no one reads except the families left behind. My mother kept their pictures too, because forgetting them felt like killing them twice. And somewhere in the middle of all this, a letter arrived from the prison. From him, the man who killed me. My mother stared at the envelope for hours. Should she open it? Should she burn it? Finally, with trembling hands, she opened it. It was only one sentence. I am sorry.
No explanation. No excuses.
Just two empty words on paper. My mother didn't reply. Some wounds are too deep for forgiveness. The letter stayed on my mother's desk for weeks. Some nights, she would stare at it like it was a ghost. Some nights, she would lock it in a drawer, as if shutting it away could also shut away the memories. But memories don't live in drawers. They live in the silence before sleep. They live in the sound of a door closing, the shadow of a man walking behind you, the way someone raises their voice too quickly. At the shelter, life kept moving. New faces came every week. Some women carried scars you could see on their arms, their faces, their backs. But some carried scars no one could see. Those were always the hardest. One woman told my mother, "I feel like a ghost in my own home." My mother nodded because she knew what that felt like. She lived in a house where laughter had been replaced by echoes. She knew what it meant to set a dinner table for someone who would never come back. A journalist once asked my mother, "Do you think telling Julia's story has changed anything?" My mother looked at the shelter, at the children playing in the courtyard, at the women sitting in circles learning how to fill out job applications, at the wall covered in pictures of faces, some alive, some gone, and she said softly, "Maybe not the whole world, but it changes their world." The book about my life was later turned into a documentary. People cried in theaters. They wrote letters to my mother. Some said, "I left because of Julia's story. I am alive because of her." Others said, "I finally saw myself in her, and I knew I had to leave." But there were nights when my mother wondered if I had ever been afraid of leaving him. Why didn't I run sooner? Why didn't I tell someone? Why didn't I scream loud enough for the world to hear? The truth is, I did. I screamed in silence, in half-finished phone calls, in bruises hidden under long sleeves, in the way I smiled at patients but looked away too quickly when they asked, "Are you okay?" But silence is heavy. It crushes you slowly, like snow on a roof until it finally caves in. One winter evening, a storm hit the town. The shelter lost power. Everyone huddled in one room with candles and blankets. And my mother told them my story. Again, she told it slowly, like a prayer, like a warning, like a promise. The women listened, their faces glowing in the candlelight, their children holding on to them tightly. When my mother finished, one woman said, "Julia should have been here with us tonight." And for the first time in years, my mother didn't cry when she heard my name. She just closed her eyes and whispered, "She is." Spring came late that year. The shelter's garden was the first thing to wake. Yellow tulips pushed through the cold soil, like they didn't know winter had taken so much from everyone here. My mother spent hours there, watering, planting, trimming, like keeping the flowers alive could keep some part of me alive too. Sometimes the women would sit beside her, One of them, a young girl with a baby, asked softly, "Was Julia afraid?" My mother smiled a little. "No," she said. "She was kind. She was gentle. But she was never afraid to love, even when it hurt." A writer came to the shelter one day. She wanted to turn my story into a book, not just the ending, but the way I laughed with my patients, the way I carried tea to an old man in room 3, the way I tucked notes into my mother's purse saying, "Don't forget to smile today." The writer said, "People need to know the whole Julia, not just the tragedy." My mother agreed, because I was more than what happened to me. I was music in a quiet room. I was light in a hospital hallway. I was someone who loved too much in a world that loved too little. At the shelter, a boy once asked my mother, "Is Julia in heaven?" My mother knelt down and said, "She's in every safe place you find, every door that locks, every night you sleep without fear." The boy didn't fully understand, but that night he told his mother, "Don't cry. Julia keeps the bad dreams away." Years later, laws changed because of stories like mine. Hotlines were created. Police training was rewritten. Shelters got more funding. One senator even held up my picture in a courtroom and said, "This is why we fight. So there are no more Julius." But my mother knew laws can protect you on paper. They can't stop someone from choosing cruelty. They can't always reach you in time. That's why she kept telling my story over and over, until it became part of the air people breathed. One evening, a nurse from my old hospital visited the shelter. She carried a small box. Inside was my old ID badge, my favorite pen, and a photo of me laughing with a patient. She told my mother, "Julia's kindness is still here, in the hospital halls, in the way we care for people. We keep her with us." My mother held that photo like it was my hand. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel alone. Rain fell softly on the shelter roof that night. The women inside listened to it like a song that didn't ask for anything, didn't take anything, just covered the world in a quiet lullaby. My mother sat by the window, Julia's photo on her lap. She whispered, "I'm sorry, baby. I couldn't save you." A counselor beside her said gently, "Maybe you couldn't save her life, but you saved so many others by telling her story." My mother nodded, but her eyes stayed on the rain, because when you lose a child, every life you save still feels smaller than the one you lost. One day a young doctor visited the shelter. She had been a medical student when I was alive. She remembered how I stayed late after shifts, bringing extra blankets for patients, smuggling in tea for the lonely ones. She said, "I became a doctor because of Julia. She showed me medicine wasn't just needles and charts. It was holding someone's hand when they were scared. It was looking people in the eye when the world looked away." The women in the shelter listened. Some cried quietly because they knew Sometimes kindness feels louder than tragedy. Years passed. My story spread far beyond our small town. Schools taught my case when they spoke about domestic violence. Hospitals named new safety programs after me. And in every courtroom where another woman fought for freedom, someone always said, "Remember Julia." But my mother kept one part of me private. She never shared my last letter, the one I wrote the night before it happened. In that letter, I didn't talk about fear.
I didn't even talk about him.
I wrote about the garden I wanted to grow, the patients I wanted to help, the children I hoped to have someday. My mother read it only to herself, on quiet nights when the world was asleep, because it reminded her I was more than my ending. I was a girl with plans, with laughter, with dreams no one got to see come true. One winter evening, the shelter held a candlelight vigil. Women, children, doctors, nurses. They all gathered in the cold wind. Each candle was for someone lost. When they lit mine, the flame flickered, then burned steady against the dark. A little girl whispered, "Look, Julia's candle doesn't go out." And for the first time in years, my mother smiled through her tears. The candlelight vigil ended, but something stayed behind in that cold winter air. A promise that my story wouldn't just fade away, like smoke from the flames. After that night, a local journalist wrote a long article about me. He interviewed my mother, my best friend from nursing school, and even the doctor who once said I changed her life. The headline read, "Julia's Voice, a Life Taken, a Movement Born." Soon more people began speaking out. Women who had stayed silent for years finally told their stories. Some called emergency lines for the first time. Others left homes they thought they could never escape. It was as if my voice, even from the other side, gave them courage. But my mother, she carried a weight no article could lift. At night she would sit in my empty room, the one with my books still stacked neatly, my nursing ID still hanging on the wall. She would run her fingers over the photo of me laughing, the one where my hair was messy from the wind, and whisper, "Why couldn't I see it coming, Julia? Why didn't you tell me everything?" But I knew why. Because sometimes a daughter wants to protect her mother, even from her own pain. One spring morning, a group of nursing students came to see my mother. They brought flowers and a framed certificate from their graduation class. It read, "In loving memory of Julia, for teaching us that kindness is as powerful as medicine." My mother cried when she read it, not the broken kind of crying anymore. This time, it was the kind that lets a little sunlight in. Years later, on what would have been my 30th birthday, the hospital opened a new wing for women's safety programs. They named it the Julia Grace Center. My mother stood at the opening ceremony, cut the ribbon with trembling hands, and said softly into the microphone, "My daughter's life was short, but her story will protect lives for generations. The crowd stood in silence. Some held hands. Some wiped tears. Because they knew this wasn't just about one girl.
It was about all of them.
But my mother never remarried. She lived the rest of her life in a small house by the sea. People would often see her walking along the shore at sunset, talking softly as if someone walked beside her. They didn't know
She was talking to me.